The first thing you notice before a hurricane isn't the wind, it's the quiet. It's an unnatural, heavy silence, like the whole world is holding its breath. The air gets thick, soupy, and carries the scent of ozone and distant, damp earth. The birds know before the weathermen do. They vanish. One minute they're squawking over spilled Cheerios on a driveway, the next they're gone, having wisely punched their ticket for a vacation in Georgia. That was the kind of quiet settling over Serenity Springs, a name so aggressively peaceful it had to be hiding something sinister. And it was. It was hiding the Serenity Springs Homeowners Association. My name is Leo. I run a business that sounds more impressive than it is, Apex Rapid Solutions. The name conjures images of corporate commandos in sharp suits solving global crises. The reality is me, my cat, and a couple of guys named Dave, solving problems that are slightly more niche. If you need a fully functional Viking longship for a town parade by tomorrow, I'm your guy. If you need a 1,000-foot-long slip and slide for a summer camp's grand finale, I'm your guy. If you need a temporary bridge because your HOA president has achieved a level of petty tyranny usually reserved for small nation dictators, well, as it turns out, I'm your guy for that, too. I just didn't know it yet. I was in my garage, conducting the sacred Floridian ritual of hurricane prep. Plywood? Check. Cases of water that will inevitably taste like plastic? Check. Enough canned chili to survive a biblical flood? Double check. My generator, a beautiful Honda EU 7000 IS that purred like a kitten, was gassed up and ready. My actual kitten, a grumpy ball of gray fur named Patton, on account of his perpetually belligerent attitude, was safely locked in his carrier, issuing meows of protest that I chose to interpret as tactical advice. The centerpiece of my garage, and indeed my life, was the Beast. She was a Ford F350, but calling her a truck was like calling the Sistine Chapel a decent paint job. Kitted out with custom storage, a bed-mounted winch system, auxiliary power, and enough lumens in its light bars to be seen from the International Space Station. The Beast was my mobile office, my workshop, and the primary source of my misery in this neighborhood. A notification buzzed on my phone. Mandatory evacuation, Zone A. Effective immediately. Hurricane Ophelia had been upgraded to a Category 3. Time to go. As I loaded Patton into the passenger seat, I caught a glimpse of my neighbor's house. Mrs. Gable, a woman whose sweetness was matched only by her collection of cats, was struggling to fit 6 carriers into the back of her ancient Buick. I gave her a wave. She gave me a watery, panicked smile back. This whole process should have been simple. Pack up, drive out, get a hotel room somewhere in the middle of the state, and live on cheap continental breakfast for 3 days. But simplicity was not in the vocabulary of the Serenity Springs HOA, and more specifically, its president, Brenda McCluskey. My war with Brenda had started small. It began, as most suburban conflicts do, over landscaping. My garden hose, to be specific. It was a standard heavy-duty green hose, but according to Brenda, who had apparently consulted a Pantone color swatch book, it was forest green, not the HOA-approved evergreen. A formal violation notice arrived in my mailbox, complete with a threateningly cheerful letterhead. It was a 25-page document citing bylaws written in a dialect of legalese so dense it could bend light. I bought a new hose. Evergreen. The next week, I got a violation for my satellite dish being visible from the street, a rule that was impossible to follow unless I mounted it in my living room. Then it was the unapproved decorative stone I used as a border for my flower bed. Each violation was a new front in a war I never wanted to fight. But her casus belli, her true and ultimate fixation, was the Beast. "Leopold," she'd said to me a month ago, cornering me while I was getting my mail. She never called me Leo. It was always Leopold, drawn out like she was accusing me of a crime. Article 14, Section 8C of the Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions clearly states that no commercial vehicles, including but not limited to vans, trucks with signage, or vehicles with externally mounted equipment, may be parked in a driveway overnight. "Brenda," I had said, trying to keep my voice even, "it's my personal truck. I don't have signage. The equipment is for my camping gear." She'd tapped a manicured nail on her ever-present clipboard, which held a copy of the Holy Bylaws. "Your vehicle has a winch, an excessive number of antennas, and what appears to be a hydraulic lift system. It is a commercial vehicle by definition. You are to park it in your garage, with the door closed, at all times." My garage, which already housed my actual work tools, had about 2 inches of clearance on either side of the beast. Parking it inside was a 20-minute sweat-inducing ordeal. But I did it. Most of the time. The one night I forgot, there was a fine taped to my windshield the next morning. So as I fired up the beast, its diesel engine rumbling with a satisfying growl that I knew Brenda could hear 2 blocks away, I felt a familiar knot of anxiety. Getting out of Serenity Springs meant crossing the Cypress Creek Canal Bridge, the one and only way in or out of our little slice of paradise. And for some reason, the line of cars wasn't moving. A pre-hurricane traffic jam was normal, but this was a dead stop. I crept forward another 20 feet, and then I saw it. The source of the problem, and it was wearing a fluorescent yellow raincoat. Brenda McCluskey was standing in the middle of the road, right at the mouth of the bridge. Her golf cart, the official chariot of the HOA patrol, was parked sideways, completely blocking the right lane. Her arms were crossed. Her face was set in a mask of grim, righteous determination. She was holding the binder. Oh God, she had the binder. I put the beast in park, the diesel engine idling like a patient predator, and got out. The wind was already whipping strands of her perfectly coiffed, helmet-like hair across her face, but she didn't flinch. A small crowd of my neighbors had gathered, their faces a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Brenda, what in the ever-loving hell are you doing?" I asked, my voice rising over the wind. "There's a hurricane coming." She turned her head slowly, her eyes locking onto me. Then she looked past me, at my truck. A thin, triumphant smile touched her lips. "Leopold," she announced, her voice cutting through the wind with practiced authority. "I am enforcing Article 7, Section 4B of the Serenity Springs Homeowners Association Covenants, Conditions, and Restrictions. The use of the community bridge for the transport of commercial vehicles is strictly prohibited without a permit filed 72 hours in advance." I stared at her. I looked at the line of cars stretching back half a mile. I looked at the darkening, churning sky. "Are you insane?" I finally managed. "It's a mandatory evacuation. My truck is how I'm leaving." "The rules are for the safety and aesthetic harmony of the community," she chirped, as if reciting from a script. "They do not cease to apply during inclement weather. In fact, that is when they are most important, to maintain order." "Order?" A guy in a Hawaiian shirt yelled from his minivan. "We're trying to escape a natural disaster, you lunatic." Brenda ignored him. Her focus was entirely on me. "You have 2 options, Leopold. You can abandon your commercial equipment and proceed in a pre-approved personal passenger vehicle, or you can turn around and return to your property." "Return to my property? It's a mandatory evacuation. That's illegal." "This bridge," she patted the concrete guardrail, "is private property. It is a community asset, maintained by HOA funds. The county's authority to mandate your vehicle's passage ends at the front gate." She wasn't just insane. She was prepared. She had workshopped this particular brand of madness. She had been waiting for this moment, for the day she could finally defeat me and the beast with her ultimate weapon. A paragraph on page 87 of a binder. The distant wail of a siren grew closer. Someone had called the cops. A small part of me felt a rush of relief. The professionals would handle this. They would talk sense into her, or failing that, physically remove her. The squad car, a crisp black and white from the county sheriff's department, pulled up. 2 deputies got out. The first was young, probably not much older than 22, with a haircut so fresh you could still smell the aftershave. He had Ramirez on his name tag, and the wide, earnest eyes of someone who still believed the world made sense. The second officer was my age, maybe a bit older. His name tag read Miller. He moved with the slow, deliberate economy of a man who was already tired, even though his shift had probably just started. He took in the scene: the blocked bridge, the irate homeowners, the woman in the yellow raincoat holding a binder like a holy text, and let out a sigh that seemed to carry the weight of every stupid domestic dispute in the history of Florida. Ramirez, bless his heart, stepped forward. "Okay, folks, let's just calm down, ma'am," he said, approaching Brenda with a level of deference that made me want to scream. "Could you please tell me what the problem is here?" It was the worst possible thing he could have done. He had given her the stage. For the next 10 minutes, Brenda delivered a master class in bureaucratic warfare. She opened her binder. She cited articles and sections. She explained the legal distinction between community assets and public right-of-ways. Ramirez's eyes started to glaze over. He was a sheep in a wolf's world, and she was quoting the fine print on the shearing contract. "Ma'am," Sergeant Miller finally interrupted, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "There is a Category 3 hurricane approximately 90 miles from our current location. I have a lawful order to ensure this area is evacuated. That order supersedes your HOA rules." "With all due respect, Sergeant," Brenda replied, the term dripping with condescension, "your order allows you to compel citizens to leave. It does not allow you to compel a private entity to permit the use of its assets in a manner that violates its own established regulations. The county attorney has already affirmed our right to enforce our bylaws on HOA property. I have the case law right here, in Appendix C." Miller stared at her. He knew she was technically, infuriatingly correct. He couldn't just drag her off the bridge, not without opening the department up to a lawsuit that would make headlines. He was trapped. We were all trapped, by a madwoman and her binder. The wind was a constant, mournful howl now. A fat drop of rain hit my cheek, then another. The sky was the color of a bruise, and then a small, trembling hand touched my arm. It was Mrs. Gable. Her face was ashen. In her arms, she clutched a cat carrier from which a plaintive meow could be heard. It was Dorothy. Dorothy had a delicate constitution. "Leo," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What are we going to do? I have to get my cats out." That was it. That was the moment the switch flipped. This wasn't about my truck anymore. This wasn't about my stupid war with Brenda. This was about Mrs. Gable and her 6 cats named after the Golden Girls. This was about the families in the cars behind me. This was about the fundamental, absurd injustice of it all. I looked at Brenda, standing there like a triumphant troll guarding her precious bridge. I looked at the bridge itself, a simple concrete span, and then I looked at the Cypress Creek Canal flowing sluggishly beside it. The canal was about 50 feet wide. The banks were grassy, muddy, but relatively clear. And I looked back at the beast, my beautiful, magnificent, commercial beast, packed to the gills with the tools of my trade: winches, generators, anchors, and tucked away in a series of long, modular cases, the solution to a problem I had solved last year for a music festival that got rained out. They'd needed a temporary walkway over a sea of mud, and they needed it in an hour. A slow, wicked smile spread across my face. The kind of smile that meant I was about to do something either brilliant or phenomenally stupid. Often, for me, the two were indistinguishable. I turned my back on the pathetic drama at the bridge. I walked past the stunned faces of my neighbors, past the useless but well-intentioned Officer Ramirez, past the weary and defeated Sergeant Miller. I pulled out my phone, the screen already slick with rain. I hit a number on my favorites list. It rang twice. "Yo," a cheerful voice answered. "Little Dave, how's your hurricane prep going?" "Almost done, boss. Just strapping the last of the patio furniture to the oak tree. Big Dave says it'll hold." "Scrap that," I said, my voice calm, almost dangerously so. "I have a priority job for you. How fast can you and Big Dave get to my place? To the bridge at the entrance of the neighborhood?" Right now? Boss, Ophelia's a real beast." "I am aware. And bring the P7S. There was a pause on the other end. The P7S? All of them? The modular pontoons?" "Every last one," I confirmed. "And the launch cradle and the drivers. We're building a bridge." I hung up before he could ask any more questions. I walked over to Sergeant Miller, who was now just staring out at the canal, probably contemplating a career change. "Sergeant," I said, clapping him on the shoulder. He flinched, surprised. "I need you to keep her distracted for me." I jerked a thumb toward Brenda. "Give me about 45 minutes, I've got this." Miller looked at me like I'd just told him I was going to flap my arms and fly to safety. Brenda scoffed, a short, sharp bark of a laugh. She thought I was bluffing. I just smiled, turned around, and walked back to my truck. With a satisfying thump, I popped the locks on the side-mounted gear cases. It was time to get to work. The 4 minutes later from the title of this whole sordid affair wasn't an exaggeration. It was the exact amount of time between me hanging up with little Dave and the moment the earth began to shake. Not from the storm, but from the arrival of my cavalry. In those 4 minutes, I became a whirlwind of activity. I backed the beast onto the wide, grassy bank next to the bridge approach, its tires sinking slightly into the damp soil. I ignored the immediate, piercing shriek from Brenda about unauthorized vehicles on the community green space and destruction of sod. I was in my element now. This wasn't a debate with a lunatic. This was a logistics problem. This was home turf. Then came the rumble. It started low, a vibration you felt in your teeth, before it grew into a roar that dwarfed the sound of the wind. Down the road, past the line of now gaping motorists, came a machine that made the beast look like a child's toy. It was a massive 40-foot flatbed truck, a Peterbilt that had seen harder days but still possessed a terrifying sense of purpose. It didn't bother with the line of cars, simply mounting the curb and thundering across the lawn, coming to a halt beside me with a hiss of air brakes. On the door, in faded letters, was the name of the Dave's own hauling company. It'll fit. The doors opened in unison. From the passenger side emerged little Dave. He wasn't particularly little, standing a solid 6 feet, but he was perpetually buzzing with a nervous, intellectual energy. He was already tapping at a ruggedized tablet as his feet hit the ground, his brow furrowed in concentration. From the driver's side, Big Dave descended. Big Dave was, in a word, big. He was a mountain of a man, with a beard that looked like it might house a family of birds. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace that belied his size. He took one look at me, one look at the canal, one look at Brenda, and gave a single, slow nod. It was the most he'd say for the next 20 minutes, but it conveyed a complete understanding of the situation and his unwavering readiness to solve it with physics. "Okay, boss," little Dave said, already by my side, not even glancing at the Hurricane Karen standoff. 50-foot span, I'd say. Light vehicle traffic only. We've got potential for Class 2 wind gusts on the Beaufort scale, but the current is negligible for now. Soil looks like a sandy loam mix, should be stable enough for the launch anchors. I've already run a preliminary stress simulation on the drive over. We're good, but I wouldn't recommend letting a cement truck use it. Liability's a nightmare on uncertified temporary structures. Brenda, seeing her authority being so thoroughly and professionally ignored, marched toward us, her yellow slicker flapping like the wings of an angry canary. "What is the meaning of this? That vehicle is in gross violation of at least 12 different bylaws. I am ordering you to cease and desist immediately." Little Dave, without even looking up from his tablet, held up a hand. "Ma'am, for your own safety, please remain at least 50 feet from the designated operational area. Per OSHA Regulation 1926.651, this is a designated hard hat zone now." He reached into the cab of his truck, pulled out 3 gleaming white hard hats, and casually tossed one to me and one to Big Dave. We put them on. The act of putting on those hard hats was like drawing a line in the sand. We were no longer residents. We were a work crew. Brenda was no longer an authority figure. She was a civilian obstruction. She stood there, sputtering, her binder held uselessly at her side. Big Dave, meanwhile, had already unstrapped the cargo. With a grunt, he pulled back a heavy tarp to reveal our salvation. Gleaming under the bruised purple sky were stacks of modular, interlocking aluminum and high-density polymer blocks. They were sleek, gray, and looked like they belonged to a military engineering corps. These were the P7 emergency pontoon units. My pride and joy. I'd bought them surplus from a government auction, and they were the single best investment I'd ever made. The neighbors were all out of their cars now. The anger had been replaced by a stunned, silent awe. This wasn't just some guy with a crazy idea anymore. This was an operation. The air crackled with the promise of glorious, constructive rebellion. What followed was a symphony, a beautiful, chaotic orchestra of diesel engines, hydraulics, and pure, unadulterated competence, with me as the conductor. It was a montage of defiance, set to the soundtrack of a coming storm. Movement 1. The anchors. Big Dave swung down from the flatbed. He grabbed what looked like a small cannon from a rack on the Beast. It was a portable hydraulic post driver. He positioned a 10-foot steel piling at the edge of the canal bank. With a deafening series of chunk, chunk, chunk sounds that echoed across the water, he drove the piling 6 feet into the earth. Brenda shrieked about unapproved soil disruption and potential damage to subterranean irrigation lines. Big Dave just wiped a bead of sweat from his brow, moved to the other side of the canal, by walking across the actual bridge and giving Brenda a wide berth, and repeated the process. We now had our anchor points. Movement 2. The launch. Little Dave directed the placement of the launch cradle, a wheeled aluminum ramp that we positioned at the water's edge. He and I began grabbing the pontoon sections. Each one weighed about 200 pounds, but they were designed for rapid assembly. We'd slam one onto the cradle, Big Dave would slide the next one into place behind it, and with a satisfying thunk and a click from the locking pins, the bridge began to take shape on dry land. Little Dave was a blur, checking each connection with a torque wrench, muttering to himself. "Okay, pin A locked, section 2 secure. Torsional rigidity at 98%. We're looking good, boss. We're looking good." Movement 3. The deployment. This was the magic trick. Big Dave attached the high-tension winch cable from the Beast to the nose of the first pontoon section. I climbed into my truck, the engine rumbling beneath me. "Winch is hot!" I yelled out the window. "All clear!" Little Dave yelled back. I engaged the winch. With a low groan, the cable tightened. The assembled pontoon sections began to slide down the cradle and out onto the water. It was a beautiful sight. The sections, now linked into a single 50-foot span, floated perfectly, unfolding across the canal like a metallic centipede stretching after a long nap. It moved slowly, gracefully, a testament to engineering and my frankly irresponsible spending habits. Of course, no masterpiece is created without complications. Brenda, seeing her powerlessness crystallizing into a floating aluminum reality, had a full-blown meltdown. She had her phone out, filming, providing a running commentary for what I could only assume was her lawsuit. This is an unsanctioned construction. They are using a non-standard winch system without a certified operator. The decibel level from that diesel engine clearly exceeds Community Ordinance 113 for a residential zone. Sergeant Miller was just leaning against his patrol car now, arms crossed, a bag of popcorn materialized from thin air. Okay, maybe not. But he had the energy of a man eating popcorn. He was enjoying the show. Officer Ramirez stood beside him, his mouth slightly agape, his by-the-book brain trying to find a page that covered civilian-deployed pontoon bridges. Then came the technical hitch. We were on the last section. The final locking pin, the one that would secure the entire structure, wouldn't seat. It was jammed. Little Dave went pale. Oh no, 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 no. The housing must have gotten warped. If we can't lock this final section, the torsional integrity is compromised. A car's weight could cause a shear... He started tapping furiously at his tablet, running new, disastrous simulations. Big Dave just looked at the stuck pin. He looked at Little Dave. He looked at me. Then he walked over to the flatbed and retrieved his secret weapon for all of life's problems. A 20-pound sledgehammer he called the Persuader. He waded into the knee-deep water, positioned himself, and swung the hammer in a single, perfect, poetic arc. There was a ringing clang that sounded like the bell of freedom itself. The pin slammed home. Big Dave grunted. Little Dave stopped tapping. He squinted at the connection. He leaned in closer. "Oh," he said quietly. "Okay. Integrity is restored. Carry on." The bridge was complete. It floated majestically, spanning the canal. It was a gleaming, temporary, and utterly illegal monument to the power of saying, "Screw it." For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the wind and the idling of my truck. Then one person started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire crowd of stranded residents was cheering, whistling, and hollering. It was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I hopped down from my truck, my boots squelching in the mud. I was covered in grease, sweat, and rainwater, but I felt like a king. I saw Mrs. Gable standing by her car, tears of relief streaming down her face, clutching a carrier containing Blanche Devereaux. I walked over to her, trying to strike a heroic pose. "Mrs. Gable," I said with a theatrical bow, "your chariot awaits." She laughed, a real happy laugh. "Oh, Leo, you're a good boy." She was the first. Her old Buick crept slowly onto the pontoon bridge. The structure groaned and settled, but it held firm. She gave me a final, grateful wave as she reached the other side and drove off toward safety. That one car broke the dam. A resounding cheer went up. The exodus had begun. One by one, the cars in the long, stagnant line peeled off, bypassing the useless concrete bridge and its defeated troll, and trundled across my creation. Minivans full of kids who waved at me like I was a superhero, pickup trucks loaded with furniture and pets, a nervous-looking teenager in his dad's sports car who drove so slowly the bridge barely seemed to notice. Each driver laid on their horn as they passed me, a cacophony of beeps and honks that was music to my ears. It was a parade of triumph, a slow-motion victory lap. And where was Brenda? She was standing alone on her bridge, the bridge to nowhere. Her yellow raincoat seemed less a symbol of authority and more a pathetic, flapping flag of surrender. The wind had ruined her hair, her binder was getting soaked, and her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her authority hadn't just been challenged, it had been rendered completely and utterly irrelevant by 50 feet of aluminum and a well-placed sledgehammer swing. She didn't scream anymore. She just watched, dumbfounded, as the community she terrorized literally floated away from her. As the last car made its way across, Sergeant Miller pushed himself off his patrol car and sauntered over. He looked at the bridge, then at me. His face was unreadable, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "Well, Mr. Apex Solutions," he said, his voice dry as dust. "My official report is going to be a real work of fiction. It will state that the obstruction on the bridge was cleared and traffic resumed flowing in an orderly fashion." How precisely that happened? Well, that's going to be a bit of a mystery. A localized miracle, perhaps. He looked me up and down, taking in my muddy boots and grease-stained shirt. "I'm also going to have to issue you a citation." My heart, which had been soaring, did a nosedive. A citation for what? He pulled out his ticket pad with agonizing slowness. "Let's see here," he mumbled, licking the tip of his pencil. "I'm citing you for faulty brake lights." I blinked. "My brake lights are fine." "Not on your winch," he said, scribbling on the pad. He tore off a blank sheet of paper and handed it to me. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of a smile. "Now get out of here before the real storm hits, and for God's sake, take that thing with you when you come back." I grinned. "You got it, Sergeant." The Daves were already packing up their gear with practiced efficiency. Big Dave gave me another one of his eloquent nods, which I interpreted as, "Job well done. Now let's go find some tacos." I climbed back into the Beast, Patton letting out a meow that sounded suspiciously like, "About time." I was the last one to cross. I drove onto my bridge, the pontoons dipping reassuringly under the weight of my truck. Halfway across, I stopped. I rolled down my window, the wind whipping rain into my face. I looked over at the official bridge, at the lonely, defeated figure of Brenda McCluskey. I gave her a small, polite, cheerful wave. Then I put the truck in drive and followed my neighbors to safety. The rumble of my commercial vehicle, the last sound she heard before she was left alone with the storm and her stupid, useless rules. The week that followed was a blur of chainsaws, blue tarps, and lukewarm coffee. Ophelia had hit the coast hard, though thankfully not as a Cat 3. Apex Rapid Solutions, which a few days ago was a weapon of suburban warfare, was now doing its actual job. The Daves and I had a small-time contract with the county for debris removal and emergency repairs. We spent 5 days clearing roads, patching roofs for elderly residents, and generally being helpful, productive members of society. It was deeply ironic. The entire time, a single question nagged at the back of my mind. What was I going back to? A hero's welcome? An astronomical fine? A lawsuit that would make my eyes water? With an HOA, you never knew. The drive back into Serenity Springs was surreal. The manicured lawns were a mess of fallen palm fronds and debris. The cheerful sign at the entrance was tilted at a jaunty, defeated angle. As I approached the bridge, I saw my guys, already there. A crane was parked on the bank, carefully lifting the last few sections of the pontoon bridge out of the water and onto the flatbed. I had, of course, filed all the proper permits with the county for the retrieval of privately owned logistical assets. I'd learned a thing or two from Brenda. Weaponize the bureaucracy. As I got out of the Beast to supervise, something strange started happening. Mr. Henderson from down the street, a guy who I'm pretty sure had previously reported me for the unauthorized height of my hedges, walked over with a 6-pack of craft beer. "Bridge builder," he said, clapping me on the shoulder. "We owe you one." A few minutes later, Mrs. Gable appeared, holding a Tupperware container that I knew from experience contained the best chocolate chip cookies known to man. "Leo, you hero," she beamed. "Dorothy is fine, by the way. She just needed a quiet room for a day." It kept happening. Neighbors would stop their cars, get out, and shake my hand. They called me the General, the Pontoon Prince, the Liberator. They told me what had happened after I'd left. Brenda, in a final, desperate act of madness, had apparently gone door to door the next day, in the middle of a tropical storm, trying to hand-deliver fines to everyone who had used my unauthorized structure. No one answered their doors. The rest of the HOA board, fearing for their lives and facing a full-scale community revolt, had convened an emergency call and voted to suspend all of her enforcement actions pending a full review. And then I saw her house. The prize-winning azaleas were flattened, crushed by a fallen oak limb. The windows were dark, but the real tell was the sign hammered into the soggy front lawn. It was a simple, brutalist sign from a local real estate agency. For sale. She was gone. Vanquished. Not by me, but by the collective will of a neighborhood that had finally had enough. I won. I had actually, truly won the war. The other shoe dropped 2 days later. A crisp, cream-colored envelope appeared in my mailbox. It had the Serenity Springs HOA letterhead on it. Certified mail. My stomach did a little flip-flop. This was it. The bill for the sod damage. The fine for the illegal construction. The legal fees for the inevitable lawsuit she'd filed before she fled. I prepared myself for a number with a lot of zeros. I opened it. It wasn't a bill. It was a summons. You are hereby requested to attend an emergency meeting of the Serenity Springs Homeowners Association Board of Directors. It was a hearing, my trial. I spent the next 24 hours preparing my defense. I printed out photos of the blocked bridge. I had a copy of the governor's mandatory evacuation order. I even called Sergeant Miller, who, after a long sigh, agreed to email me a sworn affidavit. It was a masterpiece of vagueness, stating only that Mr. Leopold's actions on the day in question assisted in the swift and safe resolution of a traffic obstruction. I walked into the community clubhouse that evening, feeling like a man walking to the gallows. But the room wasn't grim and empty. It was packed. Every seat was filled with my neighbors. When I walked in, a ripple of applause went through the room. They weren't here to see me burn. They were here as my backup. The 4 remaining board members were at a table at the front. The acting president was a mild-mannered accountant named Gary, a man whose defining feature was his beigeness. He looked terrified. He tapped the microphone. Ahem. Okay, this emergency meeting is called to order, he squeaked. The first item on the agenda, is the formal acceptance of the resignation of Brenda McCluskey as HOA president and as a member of this board. The room erupted. It wasn't just applause, it was a standing ovation. People were whistling, cheering, stomping their feet. Gary waited for it to die down, looking even more terrified. The board, he continued, reading from a prepared statement, would like to formally apologize to the community for the events that transpired during the evacuation. We were facing, more than a dozen potential lawsuits from residents for endangerment, false imprisonment, and general reckless buffoonery. He didn't say the last part, but it was heavily implied. The story, as some of you know, was featured on the Channel 8 News Florida Man Friday segment, which brought unwanted attention. Our insurance carrier informed us that our liability policy does not cover acts of God or acts of Brenda. A wave of laughter. Therefore, Gary concluded, looking directly at me, the board would like to publicly thank Mr. Leopold for his, civic-minded initiative and rapid, problem-solving. We will not be pursuing any fines or fees related to the sod, the bridge, or anything else that happened that day. In fact, we are commissioning a full review of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions to identify and eliminate any bylaws that conflict with, well, common sense. Another cheer. I felt 100 pounds lift off my shoulders. It was over. As the meeting adjourned and people started patting me on the back, Gary the accountant scurried over, holding one last cream-colored envelope. "Leo," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "one last piece of official business. Brenda processed this before she left. We're legally obligated to deliver it." My heart sank again. Here it comes, the poison pill. Her final revenge from beyond the figurative grave. I took the envelope. My name was on it, written in her spiky, aggressive handwriting. My hands trembled slightly as I tore it open. It was an invoice, an official HOA bill for $25. I scanned the description, my brain struggling to comprehend it. Fine for violation of Article 12, Section 9A, non-approved shade of garden hose, forest green versus evergreen. It was dated 3 months ago. It was the hose. The goddamn hose. After everything, the standoff, the storm, the bridge, the media, the near lawsuits, her final parting shot was a $25 fine for my garden hose. I looked at the invoice. I looked at Gary's nervous, twitching face. I looked out at the room full of my cheering neighbors. And I started to laugh. It wasn't a small chuckle. It was a deep, gut-wrenching, cathartic roar of laughter that brought tears to my eyes. The sheer, unadulterated, perfect pettiness of it all was a work of art. It was Brenda's masterpiece. Still laughing, I pulled out my wallet. I handed a slightly crumpled 20 and a 5 to the bewildered accountant. "Tell the board I'm paid in full, Gary." Later that night, I sat in my garage, the beast humming quietly as it recharged. Patton was curled on a pile of clean rags, purring for the first time all week. And on my workbench, propped up against a toolbox, was a cheap document frame. Inside it, perfectly centered, was the invoice for the hose, stamped in big red letters, "Paid in full." It was a trophy, a monument to a victory won not just with steel and hydraulics, but with absurdity. Some problems you solve with $500,000 of rapid deployment pontoon units and a couple of guys named Dave. Others you solve with $25 and a pen. In Serenity Springs, you'd better be prepared to do both. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have an email to answer. Apparently, the mayor's office got my number from the county. They want a quote for a temporary footbridge for the annual chili cook-off next month. I'm thinking of painting the railings, maybe a nice forest green.